Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, June 13th meeting of the Board for the Civilian Police Oversight Agency. We are going to do our Pledge of Allegiance. Joanne?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, the mission statement for the Board for the Civilian Police Oversight Agency is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD in the Albuquerque community. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have no public comment this evening. Does everybody have an opportunity to review the minutes?
Yes, ma'am. I make a motion that we approve the minutes.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Reports from city staff, APD?
Good evening, Chair Galloway and members of the board. I'm Commander Mark Flaherty with the Internal Affairs Professional Standards Division. During the month of May, we had 42,271 calls for service, which was an increase from April of 773. During the month of May, we completed 5 internal investigations. We have 29 pending cases. We had 16 EIRS alerts, and cases open for the month with 6.
I have a question.
Yes.
As we all know, the state police were here, or have been, or are still here. How and what areas did them being here impact your department, APD? Okay. What, did you see an increase in citations? Did you see an increase in, service calls, or? That's what I'm looking for.
As you can imagine, the state police was here for proactive action. We look at specifically policy violations related to the Albuquerque Police Department and officers' conduct. So we don't see that it affected us at this point.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions?
That's a safe answer.
I'm sorry. Hi. I have a question, and I know Director Harness has a report about this later, but I want to make sure and ask you in case you have information to add. We have not seen, and I bring this up every month, serious use of force cases or officer-involved shooting cases, and at one time we saw them with some frequency.
Okay.
I don't know why that train has stopped, and I don't know if it stopped in the CPOA or it stopped in the department. I wondered if you had any light to shed on that.
So in Internal Affairs Professional Standards, we don't deal specifically with officer-involved shootings or serious use of forces. That's Commander Middleton with the Force Division.
Okay. And he's not here tonight.
No, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Do we have a report for the vehicle crashes? Thanks.
Good evening. I'm Commander Rivera with Metro Traffic Division, Albuquerque Police. I believe you guys have the handouts here. Compiled the quarterly stats for January 1st, 2019 through March 31st, 2019. These are officer-involved crashes. There was 20 non-preventable crashes, 16 preventable crashes, and of the preventable crashes, there are 3 officers that had 2 preventable crashes within 12 months, and 1 officer had 3 preventable crashes within 12 months. And just like to let you guys know, the Crash Review Board doesn't implement discipline, the chain of command for that officer does. So it never comes back to me as to what the discipline was for these specific officers. Next was risk management claims paid out. Third-party payout for this last quarter was $330,021.47. And there was a typo. It's actually, there was 48 claims, not 43. And then for first-party damage to city property involving APD crashes, there was $131,775.74, and there was 66 claims for that. And the best example I can give is like if an officer strikes a curb, either damages their own tire or undercarriage or any type of single vehicle crash. And then there's a new training program that the chief has implemented. It's called Charlie Fegan School of Driving. It's at San Diego Speedway. And on May 22nd, 2019, he issued a special order listing a total of 24 officers to attend. It's a 2-day class. He broke it up into, the first class actually went June 11th and 12th, so they just finished their 2-day driving. And then there's another group of officers started today, tomorrow, and then the next set of officers will go June 17th, 18th. And I was explaining that it's a driving course that's closed course, and so it's just different driving scenarios. It puts officers in high-stress type of driving scenarios at the Speedway. And they're going to continue to do this, and a lot of it is officers that are seeing a pattern of bad driving or getting into these multiple crashes within 12 months. And that's all I have. Is there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that this hands-on driving thing is a new thing, because we talked about it when we first got the traffic crash report, done several, was it almost a year ago now, isn't it?
Yeah, 2 years.
2 years? And so I wanted to know where the idea for, or where the template for this training that's now hands-on training as opposed to computer, which is what it was before.
Right.
Where did that come from?
All I know is the chief has met with Mr. Fegan, and they came up with some type of...
Who's Mr. Fegan?
He's a professional driver,
Okay.
and this is the course that he puts on.
Okay.
But I know the chief met with Mr. Fegan, and they came up with some sort of curriculum, and it's a 2-day curriculum. I believe the first part of the day is classroom, and then they actually get out into vehicles, their police vehicles, and drive out at the track.
So this is a best practice somewhere, and that's
Correct.
how it got here.
That's my understanding, ma'am.
That's great. Thank you so much for filling us in on those details.
Sure.
What are some examples of preventable crashes?
Officer doesn't clear an intersection, is running, let's say, code 3 lights and sirens. They still have a duty, if they're going through an intersection on a red light, they still have a duty to clear the intersection, but they don't do it safely and getting into a crash. The vehicle either hits them, a citizen, or they hit a citizen vehicle. It could be something as minor as 2 officers meeting up and they hit mirrors and causes damage. That could be a preventable crash. And there's several examples of just different preventable crashes. Or they back in, a lot of them is backing. They back into a wall or a pole or...
I grew up hearing there's no such thing as a backing accident. If
Right.
you didn't pull straight and forward, it was your fault no matter what.
Right.
So that just triggered that thought. So when you have officers that have multiple preventable crashes in a 12-month period, I assume they take that course, but
Right.
is there anything else, any other kind of proactive training that takes place with them?
We're working at getting our hands and getting a contract for a driving simulator. And that's unique because we can add in different scenarios based on their reactions. And we like that idea because, again, you're not going to maybe put a car or someone at risk out at the driving track. Yeah, it's closed course, but actually it can still happen. So we're working on getting a contract drawn up to buy this equipment. And it's like almost like a 3D surround sound, and you're in a police type vehicle with a radio, police radio, and your computer, and we're working on getting that implemented. And that's being bought, a lot of it's through a lawsuit, and the families decided to help us buy that.
Well, that's nice.
So that sounds like what FATS training is to
Correct.
use shooter things, that's what it would be for driving.
It's very similar to that.
Yeah.
What's your timeline on that? Do you
They
guys know?
said they're working on it. I mean, they said they're actively working on it. They're hoping within a couple of months.
That's great. If you'll tell us about that when it comes, that would be
I
great.
will.
I have a question about the third, can I do this?
Absolutely.
On the second page, it says APD crashes involving police crashes from January 1st to March 31st. It says third-party payout, so that's bodily injury. Or how would you compare bodily injury, or how would you compare preventable crashes with bodily injury crashes? Is there a correlation between those two things?
Yeah, but I mean, you're going to have preventable crashes, you know, as we're saying, you know, an officer trying to clear an intersection, and they cause a crash because they didn't clear it safely. If someone's injured in that crash, you have the preventable part of the crash review board, and then if they make a claim against the city, then that part would be the bodily injury claim. Does that answer that?
It makes me wonder if it's not preventable, you know, it's something that it's not preventable. I think there's a case to be made that preventable crashes that result in lawsuits, would be a sales point for raising money for the tools you need to make those preventable crashes go away.
True.
So that's why I was looking for a correlation between those two things.
Yeah, and I don't want to really say there is a correlation, but I want to say there's not a correlation. But there could be some cases too where the board finds it non-preventable and a person can still sue the city.
Yeah,
And
I see what you mean.
And they could still settle.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Is there any way to get this information like on a rolling 4-quarter period so that we can see them see how they're trending up or down?
I can ask Risk Management, they're the ones that provide me the numbers, but yeah, I can ask.
Okay,
I don't see why not.
awesome.
It's really helpful for us to understand it. Thank you.
Understood.
Yeah, kind of puts it in context.
Right.
All right, any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next is City Council, and Mr. Moya is not able to be with us tonight. Director Harness, is there any benefit into reading his email into the record?
I think it would be good for the public to know.
Yeah.
Chair Galloway, I think, yes, I think that the news regarding the new board members is something that should come out for the board.
Okay. So this was from Julian today. He says, "My apologies for not being able to attend tonight's meeting. Below is my report. At Monday's Finance and Government Operations Committee meeting, Director Harness presented and discussed the 2017 CPOA annual report. Final acceptance of the report will happen at a City Council meeting in August. The council will be introducing communications to appoint 2 new members, Ms. Tara Armijo Pruitt and Mr. Eric Olivas, to the board at next Monday's City Council meeting. Staff will also be requesting immediate action on the items to have them approved that night. For the remaining open board position, council staff will be re-reviewing current candidates and recently reviewed applications for appointment. We plan to have that appointment ready for August when council returns from their July break. As we did with the last appointments, when we've chosen a candidate, we will send you their contact information for orientation with the outreach subcommittee."
Both candidates are here tonight. Tara Pruitt is right there, and Eric Olivas, who has spoken to this group before because he was very involved in the CPC. So I just want to welcome them to being here, and they're viewing our board member as part of the process, keeping in touch with the ordinance.
Absolutely. Thank you both. All right, moving on. Anybody here from the mayor's office?
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Kinzer Jackson. I'm an assistant city attorney, but I've been asked to speak on behalf of the administration tonight. The administration would like to update the board of the CPOA regarding the exit interview between the monitoring team and the mayor and his executive staff. As it pertains to the CPOA and its board, the monitor shared 2 concerns during the exit interview. The monitor stated that if the new members of the POB are not appointed within this monitoring period, that he would find non-compliance with the relevant paragraph of CASA. We ask that the board continue to work with the city and city council as far as the appointment to fill the last vacancy on the board. The monitor also expressed concern that civilian complaints are not being mediated, and the city encourages the CPOA to use the services of the city's mediation office to begin mediating civilian complaints. The administration appreciates the service of the board and remains committed to working with the board.
I have a question, if you don't mind. The mediation, wasn't there something, Mr. Harness, about the mediation, that the reason there was a hiccup and a holdup in that is that we were negotiating on a contract with that. Wasn't that the case?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, no, the halt in the mediation was because the court granted only a temporary 6-month trial. And then with the transition of the new judge, we have not brought before the court the agreement and stipulation that we would attempt the program again for 1 more year. So that's the
So the
That's
holdup
the-
is we
that's
haven't
the
gone to the
holdup.
judge?
The holdup is that we don't have an order from the judge approving what would be the parties' agreement to continue the program.
So what needs to be done to satisfy what the administration's asking?
The parties will have to submit a stipulation to Judge Browning for his approval.
My understanding after meeting with the monitoring team was that we didn't actually need approval, we just needed to kind of alert the court that we were going to be doing that. You guys were both there, and Valerie, you were there at that meeting. Did I misunderstand that?
Chair Galloway, I was part of that conversation, but my understanding, if we follow the protocol we followed previously, is that the parties will enter a stipulation agreeing to use mediation because mediation is not set forth in the CASA. The CASA states that all complaints must be investigated, so therefore we will need the approval of the court.
Tina, what was your takeaway on that?
Chair Galloway, I can't recall specifics as far as whether it would be a stipulation with an order or just a notice, but I believe Ms. Van Meter is standing and may have an answer for us.
Hi, Lindsay.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. It is correct that in one way, shape, or form, the parties, along with the approval of the monitor and the board, need to alert the court that we would like to suspend the paragraph which states that these complaints cannot be mediated. So it can be done with a stipulation. It's going to depend on what is the most palatable to both the DOJ, the city, and all of the involved individuals. We had these discussions back at the site visit in November, and we're going to work forward to get this done, and then we had our change in judge. The city, and I was going to alert you of this in my update, but with the site visit a couple weeks ago, and then I was on vacation, and now Elizabeth Martinez is on vacation, we were waiting until next week to ask the court to get back into the flow of having hearings and regular conferences. And so this will be a good opportunity for us to present the issue to the court as well, to let the court know we will do it the way the court wants us to do it.
Right.
So we'll get to work on this.
You're satisfied that the ball's in motion?
We're satisfied that we're about to get the ball in motion.
Okay.
So
All
we
right.
should have kind of an update at next month's board meeting. We should have more firm footing on this issue.
I just wanted to make sure that, as the appointee for the mayor's office, that you had the information you needed to go back with.
Madam Chair, Board Member Fine, yes, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
City Attorney?
All right, good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. So my update for you is that we're about to get the ball rolling on having status conferences again. It's going to depend on how Judge Browning wants to proceed as to whether we go back to having monthly conferences or not, and as to whether or not we have public hearings. This is entirely the judge's decision as to how to proceed, but I do understand that we are going to ask for the same process that was followed with Judge Brack. In addition, the city and NAPD is working hard on developing the training on the new use of force policies. The department is moving forward with a 4-tier training system. Tier 1 has already been approved and delivered to officers via Power DMS, and based on questions and requests for clarification from officers, they are making revisions to Tier 2, which will be the classroom portion of the training, and then subsequent portions will include reality-based training and and scenarios. So we're moving forward as far as the use of force policies go. We thank you for your recent comments, or at least letters of non-comment on policies. We appreciate that notice. It's helpful for us moving forward. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
I always do. My question has to do with that, at some point, the academy person who, I don't remember now who that was, or at which point there's been a changeover, but the academy person said we were welcome to come and see that training for the use of force, the classroom portion of it. Is that still available to us? And if so, would somebody let us know when that is?
I will take your request back to the academy, and I don't know why you wouldn't be able to attend.
Yeah,
So.
that's what he said, but I just don't know how to find out when it is.
The current commander of the academy is Angela Bird. You can always reach out to Commander Bird. Also, you can reach out to Deputy Chief Griego, who is also, he has oversight of the academy. And like I said, I will go back in as well, and we'll get an answer for you.
That would be great. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. CPCs. Anybody want to comment on? No? Okay. APOA.
I don't think they're
There's
here.
nobody here from APOA. I would like to just kind of point out that one of the comments when we met with the monitors a couple weeks ago was that there's always a spot for APOA on the agenda, and it would be nice if we could get an update from them on their perspective and just kind of foster that open dialogue and communication between their end of the spectrum and ours. So, CPOA, Director Harness?
Good evening, Madam Chair, Honorable Board. First off, item number 1, CPOA backlog of cases. We've trimmed about 10 off of that backlog, and those will be before the board next month. I'll skip to Member Fine's question about serious use of force and officer-involved shooting cases. At the June 4th meeting with the Compliance Bureau, the stakeholders, there was a report out that the Force Review Board policy has finally been approved. It was approved with the language that this board submitted to the chief, in that, in accordance with the May 2016 agreement, that this board would review serious use of force cases once they've been through the complete APD process. And the Force Review Board is that final piece. That was incorporated into the policy, so once a case is through Force Review Board, within 15 days, that case will be presented or given over to the board to the CPOA board for review. And I want to get the boards mixed up. Right now, the timeline as they're proposing it is Force Review Board training will be the 1st and the 2nd of July. And then they are hoping that they will have a first live Force Review Board on July 11th. Once they have the Force Review Board up and running, while there is this backlog, they will be doing Force Review Boards once a week, I believe, every Thursday morning. So that's the reason why there haven't been any serious use of force cases for the board to review at this point.
And the 15 days is the time we have to review them. Are we going to get the oldest ones first, the current ones? What are we going to get?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, the 15 days is the time that APD is required to turn it over to you.
Oh,
You will have all the time that you want to review the cases, and they will come as they go through the Force Review Board. I do not know exactly what sequence they're going to do them.
okay. So you didn't anticipate that, because in terms of recommending discipline or that kind of thing, when we look at that, if we think there's something wrong, isn't there a period that we could have comment on there relative to recommendations for discipline?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, in this case, because it is a use of force that has gone through the Force Review Board, if the board in the past if they believed that there was something improper or there was something out of policy, then the board's recommendation to the department is to initiate an internal affairs investigation.
Okay, so that's the objection we could make. It's not a recommendation for, it's a recommendation to change the investigation or to further the investigation in a different way.
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
On May 13th, myself, Attorney Martinez from the Department of Justice, Chief Geyer, Deputy Chief Ross, and City Attorney Aguilar met regarding the abbreviated Citizens Police Academy. During that meeting, concerns were brought forth about speculation that the 2 weekends in a row training was not going to be offered any longer. It will be offered one more time, and that offering is going to be in October. After that, APD will assess the portions of the Citizens Police Academy that are necessary, in their opinion, for the board to function, and they will announce when those are going to be, when those sessions are going to happen during a regular Citizens Police Academy. At this time, the chief doesn't believe that he can facilitate the continued practice of the 4 days, 2 weeks in a row, because of the overtime costs that it brings to the department. And in looking at the new ordinance gives APD the leeway to say, these are the important portions of the Citizens Police Academy, here's where they're going to be offered, and this is your opportunity as the board member or the new board member to attend that session.
And do you know when the Citizen Police Academy regular sessions are? I mean, in terms of the course of the year, October is one. Are there others?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, I don't know their Citizens Police Academy schedule at this point. There will be the first opportunity in October for our new board members to attend the 4-day, 2 weekends in a row session. So if we have everyone seated, then we'll take care of that for the foreseeable future until we have newer board members.
And is it your understanding that until they go through the academy, they can't vote on cases?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, I don't believe that that is actually the case. I think that there's outlined minimum trainings that are in the ordinance that does not include the Citizens Police Academy. I believe the ordinance requires that Citizens Police Academy be attended within 6 months of appointment.
Okay, so all that conversation we had before is now gone. As far as I guess my reason for asking when besides October is that it is predictable that in February we will have people roll off this board. And assuming we're not going to go through the long period that we went through this time to get replacement board members, we should have people in the wings ready to take those seats come March. And that training time to that would be really helpful to us. Just saying.
Chair Galloway and Member Fine, I hear what you're saying. They are going to have to produce a schedule long-term because this not only has to accommodate CPOA board, it also has to accommodate CPCs as well. So they will have to provide some long-range scheduling so that there can be some planning.
Is Anna Erickson still kind of spearheading the Citizens Police Academy stuff?
Chair Galloway, yes, she is.
So we got a friendly contact there. Yes, sir.
Who tracks the the actual classes that they attend? Who's in control of that?
You mean,
They-
like,
board
they sign
members?
in? when-
Yeah,
Remember
I
we
mean-
signed in?
I'm sorry?
When we did it for the academy?
Yeah, well, we have a list of actual classes that they want to go to, they need to go to?
Yeah, he's saying they're changing that.
Okay.
Are you talking about like all of the training to become a board member, not
Right.
just the police academy portion? I think that's.
Is that you, Ed?
Ed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions
I thought
about
you meant
that
the
stuff?
academy. Sorry.
Chair Galloway, Honorable Board, on May 22nd and May 23rd, we met with the Associate Monitor, Mr. Giaquinto. We discussed IMR 9, and we discussed the factors that brought us out of compliance for paragraph 192. As previously stated, the concerns about board appointments were in the monitor's report, along with the interference with the contract of the executive director, and then the concerns with two CPC cases, one of them the appeal, and then one of them the 13218. Additionally, we discussed the fact that as an agency, we requested 4 additional investigator positions that were not funded in the budget. And so the monitor, the associate monitor, and I discussed then what are the next steps, what are the parameters. And he stated that the monitoring team would be mindful of the requests and the shortfall, and then they would be urging the city that they would have to go one of 2 directions. Either they would have to fund the positions as we request them so that we can timely investigate all complaints, or the next step would be that there needs to be some negotiation and some expansion of investigative timelines. That is the next step as the monitoring team saw it. So they will have those discussions with the city during the next monitoring visits, which will be, I believe, in November. APD is providing the data for us for 298 on a disk for our review. Dr. Winograd is retiring, so he will no longer be working with APD and their data. His replacement is Sharon Press. As Attorney Van Meter stated, Tier 1 use of force training is taking place at the academy, and they believe that they'll be completed with that by November of 2019. The APOA has filed an objection with the court regarding language in policy 2-57, which is supervisory investigation of use of force cases. As Attorney Van Meter stated before, we really have no idea of scheduling at this point with Judge Browning. And I have not yet seen a copy of the objection that was filed by the APOA. The oral quarterly report that was to be presented next Monday has been pushed to August 5th at the request of the City Council. I will need ride-along updates for the reporting period for IMR 10, which the reporting period ends July 31st. The first possible public hearing with Judge Browning may be in August, when there's the release of the paragraph 298 report. And the drafts of the 2 2018 semi-annual reports have been distributed to board members. And I stand for questions.
Do you expect that you will receive a copy of the objection the APOA has to the language, and you said it was 257?
Chair Galloway, yes, I expect that I'll get it, or I can, if I can remember my old federal passcode, I can try and go in and get a copy of it, but I'll get a copy of it when Ms. Martinez returns from vacation.
Okay, is that something that we can make sure is on our agenda for policy committee? Just,
I'd like to make sure the whole board gets it.
yeah, but, well, sure, but just to make sure that we go over policy 2-57 and kind of reread that in context with APOA's objections, just to kind of know what may be coming down the pipe. Okay.
I'd like to know what their objection is too. So when you get it, please pass it on.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for the date on the ride-along period ending. I appreciate that.
Yes, also,
Personally.
I will be doing an annual legal update training before the end of the monitoring period as well, so keep your eyes and ears open for that.
Legal update training?
Yes, it's part of the mandated annual training for board members.
Legal, and, yeah, I know that, but what exactly is it?
Chair Galloway, Member Fine, I think we'll review, as I'm envisioning it, I think we'll review some of the decisions that have come from the 10th Circuit regarding searches and reasonableness and decisions that impact police
Great.
work.
Terrific, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Moving on, reports from subcommittees. Outreach.
This is our new brochure. Thank you, Amanda. It is in English and Spanish. We printed 5,000 of them. The complaint form is on it, and it is a self-mailer. It's taken a long time for this, I know, but it is done and done right, and the collateral materials that go with this are also being taken care of. I think we have distributed, Amanda, to all the places in the community where these go, which include police stations, but also community centers, et cetera. So we look forward to getting some play with that. We have a media plan that goes along with the annual report that we will be doing, so that we'll be notifying the media that these forms exist, and so that they can do a story on that. I just wanted to, we left some at the sign-up place. If you're interested, Amanda has more, if you're interested in that. We have some other, that was all we covered in our meeting. There was some other things that came up that haven't reached conclusion yet, but we will deal with them in the next meeting, which is, Amanda, what day? What? 25th of June at 1 o'clock in 106 at the, what's it called? Plaza del Sol. Thank you.
Okay. Policy and procedure. Chelsea?
Sure. Okay, so,
Your mic.
so we met at our regularly scheduled date and time, which this month happened to be on June 6th. The meeting focused on reviewing our rules and procedures, the recommendations we received from council to bring our rules and procedures on board with the changes to the ordinance. We have pulled that subject, generally speaking, out of this update from the subcommittee and have included it as an independent agenda item, so we'll get to that in a few. However, also listed under here is something we did in the month of May, which was review some of the sort of hanging recommendations that had come from cases, recommendations that had come from CPOA investigators as they caught issues during their investigations. And so we made the decision to put 3 policy proposals into one letter and ask the board to consider them. They're relatively, well, I mean, there's nothing earth-shattering here. I don't know that they're minor, but if you take a look at the letter that's included in your packets, the first SOP recommendation we make is to the OBRD policy, and we recommend that they add traffic accidents to their mandatory recording list within that policy, reason being we get quite copious levels of complaints from people who've been involved in accidents who feel that the officer didn't properly adjudicate fault. They're being blamed, or they got the story wrong, or whatever. And since we don't have videos, I mean, we really, I guess the idea is that if there were videos, it would just be a lot easier to suss these complaints out, and that it would insulate officers from these false claims that sometimes seem to be motivated by the parties' civil concerns concerning their traffic accident civil cases. So we recommend that the Policy and Procedure Subcommittee recommends to this board that the board recommend to APD that APD add traffic accidents to its list of mandatory recording incidents within the OBRD policy. The second SOP we make a recommendation concerning is regards records. This recommendation came from a complaint where someone had received a court date for a traffic citation, appeared in court, and the thing had vanished. And upon investigating what had happened, the investigator learned that there really is not much of a record that exists regarding handwritten traffic citations. And so we thought to make a recommendation that they keep a paper log of these citations, because the citations themselves are handwritten. And that would be unless and until this new system comes online that might address the record keeping. But we just don't know when that will be. And then the third recommendation, third and last, is that APD get together with the Pawnbrokers Association and consider updating their MOU. We have a good deal of cases, I mean, at least a few that come through regarding pawn shops and how they handle things. And the MOU that exists is from 1997, and the policies both parties follow really deviate from what's on paper at this point, and so we make a recommendation that these two parties get together and update their MOU to reflect current practices. And so, so we put all these 3 together. We'll see if that was wise right now as we ask the board to take a vote on it.
I have one question, may I? Mm-hmm. On the second one, what problem does this solve? Because I'm not understanding that because there's not a physical system or an electronic system yet ready, what I'm hearing you say is keeping a paper log would be helpful because, and that's the part I'm missing.
I think from what I understand from the investigator is that it's a matter of tracking what happens to citations. When people are cited for traffic incidents, there is no, there's just no system in place really at all for tracking those things. They basically write them oftentimes on paper, and then they drop them in these boxes. And then someone hand delivers those paper citations to the courthouse. And so if something gets lost along the way, it's unclear as to what happened, if someone lost a whole bunch of them, or if it was delivered to the wrong person at court, or there's just no way of knowing what's, the path that these citations are taking. And
So
it
if
would
there
help
was
us
a
understand
paper log, then the court would know what to expect.
Yes, I think that's the gist of it.
Is that the gist of it? Well, I think all 3 things are good ideas and well thought out, and I'm glad you did it.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, that's a motion. Let's pass it.
So I make a motion that we issue this letter to APD with the 3 policy recommendations brought forth by Policy and Procedure Subcommittee.
Second.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
I motioned
Motion,
and
Leonard seconded.
And so that concludes my report. Our next regularly scheduled meeting would occur on July 4th. As that is a national holiday, we are going to have to pick a different time where the room is available, so you'll be receiving separate notification about when that meeting will occur.
next is case review.
Okay, the case review subcommittee did not meet last month. What happened is we received an email from our attorney, Mrs. Gooch. In this email, she advised us not to have a meeting. Apparently, there is an issue under the new ordinance that doesn't include this, having a committee. And so I think what I'll do is I will defer it and we'll discuss it later more in detail because it's under the discussion issue this evening. Thank you.
Okay, next is Personnel Subcommittee, and that is mine. So we were in the process of working on a progressive disciplinary action policy because there's not one in place right now for the position that this board oversees, which is the executive director position. And so we're kind of in limbo with the city's HR department. There's a question kind of lingering as to whether or not a policy of this nature is in existence for a similar position within the city. And so we are inviting them to join us at our next personnel subcommittee to kind of discuss those things with us face to face and kind of rid ourselves of any miscommunications or misunderstandings that come via phone or text or email. Hi, Lindsay.
Thank you for recognizing me, Madam Chairperson and members of the board. City Legal, specifically Melissa Coons, who was not able to be here today, is willing to advise the board on this issue. She's been in discussion with Ms. Gooch about this as well. And per the CASA and the ordinance, City Legal is willing to advise you on personnel issues. And they can look forward to continuing to work with you.
And certainly it's appreciated. So thank you. So that's kind of where that stands. Other things that have happened is we did complete the review of our executive director, and unfortunately, I have been insanely busy, and I have not yet kind of pulled all of that information together as I committed to do. So I'm hoping to do that realistically in the next couple of weeks, to be able to do that, and at which point Member Fine and Member Waits and I will meet with Executive Director Harness and kind of go over those and come up with a plan. So we appreciate your input. After that is done, that's kind of the last piece that Member Fine is remaining with the Personnel Committee to kind of finish out. At that point, Member Cass has expressed an interest in joining the Personnel Subcommittee. And if I remember correctly, our new board member, Mr. Olivas, has expressed an interest in joining the Personnel Committee. So we're looking forward to your participation there as well. This is where I look at you and say, did I miss anything? Okay. So that's it as far as the Personnel Committee goes. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 28th at 9:30 in the Plaza del Sol basement hearing room. Okay, moving on to item number 9 on our agenda, discussion items. Case Review Subcommittee.
Okay, I am going to defer this to Joanne Fine to give you the information about what is going on.
So apparently, and Valerie has done this because Leonard and I, and most recently Leonard has left the Case Review Committee, but I've been on it for the whole time that I've been on the board, which is why I have some history with this. In the new ordinance, as it was reviewed by our attorney, it appeared as though the city was saying that we should not have a subcommittee on case review, that the cases should come to the full board at our board meetings. I think that we've been in communication with the city attorney's office and looking for clarification on this because it is inconsistent with the meetings that we had with the city. We think this is a hiccup somehow. And so we'd like to resolve this for a couple of reasons. One is, I think that and I think the committee thinks that if we were to not have a case review committee, just from a practical standpoint, it would be a nightmare, especially when we get serious use of force and officer-involved shooting cases. The amount of time that it takes is enormous. All board members are required to review all of them, but 3 of us were asked to drill down into the weeds on these things and to really understand the work that was done by the staff and the conclusions that they reached. And our intention in doing that is to make sure that we, on behalf of the citizens of this community, really look at those 3 types of cases that are the reason for our existence as a board, and that is civilian oversight. Without the board, there is no civilian oversight. So it would be self-defeating to not have a case review committee, in my opinion, because somebody has to drill down on that. Just as personnel, somebody has to drill down on it. All of us can't drill down on all of this. There's too much of it. So I would say that it would be unwise for us to meet, as the attorney told us not to meet. But I also think that it would be unwise for us to pass on these cases. In item number 10 on the agenda, I would say that this hiccup needs to be resolved. I do believe, and we have reason to believe that the city believes that this was a mistake, and we need to fix that mistake. So I'm making 2 points. It is practically impossible. These meetings would go on for long, long periods of time to drill down on every single case in the way that we would have to do when it comes to serious use of force and officer-involved shootings and some civilian complaints. And I think that it is not the city's intention, certainly none of the meetings we had with them made it seem as though they were going to decide for us how we were going to meet our obligations in terms of committee structure. So I really think this whole thing is a hiccup, and we should not be reviewing cases until the hiccup is resolved. And that's my recommendation to this board.
So is it a motion to?
We are on the precipice of resolving this problem with the city. Right now, it appears that our attorney is rightfully concerned that we not violate what it says in the ordinance. But what it says in the ordinance is the city telling us how we review cases. And I don't think they want to do that. It's in violation of the CASA as well, as far as I'm concerned. So I'm sure that they don't mean to do that. They didn't mean to make that be the case. And I'd rather solve this. Lindsay's been terrific in helping us with this and knowing what the path forward is to resolve it with the city. In the interim, let's just solve it. I don't want to have cases come back to us because they didn't go through the process that we established. So let's solve that problem first, and then let's get back to the cases. We'll bring all of them to the board at the next meeting.
Okay, so then I guess we need a motion to table item 10, which are the, roughly 25 cases or so maybe, until next month's board
Sure.
meeting?
I need a little more clarification. I'm not truly understanding. Could you explain what the issues are?
Chair Galloway and Member Waits, the issue is in section 9-4-1-8 of the amended ordinance. We used to be under an ordinance provision Section C that simply said, "The POB shall review the proposed findings and recommendations from the executive director and shall by majority vote of members present make the decisions that the board has been doing at the regular board meetings." The amended ordinance changes that. It adds requirements and other restrictions and information on the board by requiring now that the board shall review the proposed findings and recommendations at any properly noticed regular or special meeting. It also then requires the board members shall at a minimum adhere to the following standards of conduct. And of import of those, there's 3 in the ordinance. The 2 that pose concerns about the continued meeting of the case review subcommittee are number 2, refrain from any ex parte communications relating to matters and parties under consideration other than at a properly noticed meeting. The idea there is that if the subcommittee meeting it does not fit with the definition of the board having a noticed regular or special meeting, that the discussions at the subcommittee meeting could violate Section 2. And Section 3 of the ordinance requires that the board refrain from prejudgment on complaints coming before the board until such time as all relevant information has been reviewed and considered at a properly noticed meeting. The concern for the subcommittee's members is that if the ordinance means what it says, but the board has to have these reviews at a properly noticed regular or special meeting, that the subcommittee could inadvertently be violating its duties to refrain from prejudgment if it is having those subcommittee meetings and discussions. And the question is that what the intent was, and is that feasible? And I believe what Vice Chair Fine has pointed out is no. But how do we fix it? And that is the next step that the board needs to decide. And where we are now is I've provided you a proposed letter to Mr. Aguilar on behalf of the city, where I've set forth your decision tree on this issue. The first choice is to say, we think that we can call our subcommittee meetings a regular or special meeting. I think it would have to be a special meeting called by the chair every month, and that during that meeting, we don't believe that what is happening would be violations of the subsections 1 through 3. The other option is what my reading of the amended ordinance is that this poses a concern about the continued viability of the subcommittee, and that we need to work with City Council to clarify this and get this fixed so that the board and its subcommittee can do its oversight function in a manner that it has previously done moving forward.
So my take on, we were told not to meet. The case review committee could not meet because it might be in violation. Doing away with the case review committee is, to me, removing the heart out of this process, and the reason for it being. And so I object to that strongly, and I do think that the board does take these case review things very seriously, and so does the case review committee take it seriously. So I don't think it was the intention of the city, certainly not in any of the meetings we had about the ordinance, where there was any whiff of, you're not going to be able to do this in subcommittee. The case review committee has to disappear, which was the take that she had. She was afraid that, the lawyer was afraid that we would be in violation. And so therefore said, stop meeting, okay? I'm saying we'll stop meeting until we fix this problem and get back. And I'm not clear. To me, the clarity comes when the city says what their intent was. I don't want to jerry-rig something that fits the words in here without knowing that the content is not askew. I don't know that right now whether the city has a problem with how we did it before. I don't know the answer to that question. So I'd like to know if there's a problem, and if there is, what is it? And then let's solve it. But to my way of thinking, there's no logic in getting rid of the case review committee right now. So let's find out from the city what they intended. Let's talk about that and bring it back to the board next
in the next meeting.
So I think that we have two pieces that need to be kind of separated out. The first is I did make a motion to withdraw these cases, to table these cases until next month. So,
I'll second that.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the second is, it sounds like you need I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Chair Galloway, so the board is not prepared to accept the findings as being presented?
No.
No.
We're just holding on to it for one more month until we get some clarity. So the second piece, I think, Tina, you need some direction as far as this letter goes? So we can open that up for discussion?
Can I chime in?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I know I'm not our lawyer, but I can't help but think like a lawyer since I am one. And I also don't want to see the case review subcommittee go away. But the problem that, and I definitely tried to look at the way the ordinance was written, like in a really creative way that would just allow us to hang on to it without having to really do anything. But ultimately, I came around to thinking that's not possible. I don't know what the city's intent was, but I know that, intent is only becomes really relevant to interpreting statutory authority when there's ambiguity in the language. And I don't think there is ambiguity in the language here. I think it's like pretty obvious that the case review subcommittee is kind of not legal, unfortunately. And I think that if we run afoul of that language, we just open ourselves up to lawsuits like immediately. And that's the reason why I would be not inclined to have the case review subcommittee continue its business unless the ordinance is changed. Just because I really do think that it says that we can't have it. I think that's what the ordinance says, even if it didn't mean to say it. And, there are so many people who observe this case review process that if we just keep the case review subcommittee around to look at cases, then someone will eventually, or maybe not even eventually, maybe right away challenge us. So I feel like we have to either have a secondary meeting monthly to be legal, or we have to ask the city or someone to propose just one amendment fixing this one thing. And that's just me being conservative, wanting to avoid lawsuits. But I wholeheartedly agree with what you want. I want the same thing you want, which is to keep the case review subcommittee around.
Well, and all of the negotiations that we've had with the city on this ordinance, we have been very clear about the independence of this process. Mm-hmm. How we do what we do is our business, okay? It is not their business. And so this is new, okay? And if it's new, maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not. Let's find out first whether it's intentional or not. Because if it's intentional that the city is now telling us how we do what we do, I want to understand the reason for that, because I don't. Mm-hmm. And I'm not willing to dance around, well, maybe we'll fix this and we'll do that. Let's find out from them. Let's go to the source. Let's find out what their problem is, if any. If they don't have a problem with us doing it the way we've done it before, then fine. If they do, let's be more clear about what that is. Always understanding that the independence of this process is the thing that makes it important and working. So if the city intends to tell us how we work these cases and how we meet the established business in the ordinance, this is the first time. They don't tell us how to run personnel. They don't tell us how to run policy. They don't tell us how to run outreach. So why this? This is the core of what we're here to do. And I want to know the answer before we have a letter. I want to know what the problem is before we have a question. I'm not willing to accommodate this change without understanding whether the change was intended or not. I don't want to accommodate it. I don't want to come up with 3 options. I want to understand why the option we had doesn't work for them. Let's find out. Let's find out what they really want, and then let's solve that together. That's all of us around a table, it's not a letter.
I guess, thoughts?
I'm processing.
I mean, I'm completely comfortable in like having the, you know, the roundtable discussion. I'm fine with that. I don't know why we can't, and who is going to be part of that?
Yet, would we ask for a study session, or how would we, what would be the efficient way of just
Right.
being like, hey, city, let us know?
And Lindsay,
What you
if
meant
you've
here.
got any pearls of wisdom with this too, please feel free.
You know, I do have a concern. One, we're not going to review these cases. The second thing is, we're going to double up on these cases coming next month, too. What's going to be the process, and I guess it goes back to what you're asking, how are we going to get this satisfied in a timely fashion?
Well,
So
they've
that
already,
we'd-
we've already communicated this to them initially. Okay,
Okay.
so we're in the process right now. No, we're not?
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair Fine. I have inquired informally of where we should go with this request or issue, and was instructed that we need to communicate with the city attorney about it to get the process started. And that's where the impetus from the letter came from, was so that we have a formal process going so that the right hand knows what the left is doing, if you will. I appreciate that Ms. Van Meter will speak with me informally about these things, but they are just that. They are informal discussions. I have no authority on behalf of the board to take a position on things, which is why I presented the letter for you all to consider tonight. I don't believe that Ms. Van Meter's informal communications with me was anything other than that either. It is an opportunity to present how the board would like to vote moving forward and opening those discussions and how it is that the board wants to proceed. So if there's been any miscommunication on my part with that, I apologize. I think right now it's the board's decision to decide what it wants to do. I provide legal advice based on what the amended ordinance says, but ultimately it's up to you as a board to decide what actions you want to take and what information you would like me to convey on your behalf.
Ms. Van Meter?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, I did have a good informal discussion with Ms. Gooch about this issue. I appreciated her explaining to me her view and interpretation of the ordinance and the issues that it's presenting for the board. I also appreciate the discussion here today. One of the things that we discussed was the possibility of communicating with council. And one of the things we discussed was the possibility of a letter being sent after Ms. Gooch could present the issue to you all. You know, this is not my place to advise the board as to how to move forward. That is Ms. Gooch's role. We just, you know, have had informal conversations at this point, and we recognize the concerns that you're raising under these circumstances, and we'll work with you as far as moving forward. I cannot speak to the intent of council.
Oh, of course not. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here.
I have a quick question. Ms. Gooch, what are the legal liabilities if, you know, if the case review committee were to continue to exist? Is the outcome a lawsuit from someone who thinks that we're afoul of the statute, or? Because there is no like cause of action laid out in the ordinance, so maybe that's not really the main concern.
Chair Galloway and Member Van Deventer, that is not the concern that I have raised in advising the board about this. The concern is that it could be grounds for termination of any individual board member for not complying with the code of ethics set forth by the city and also incorporated in the amended ordinance. Those are other concerns that had not crossed my mind, but the bigger concern is insulating the board from collateral attacks based on claims of impartiality or violations of the amended ordinance that says these ex parte communications and any other prejudgment shall not occur.
We have been doing this way for 5 years. And I'm open to a new way, but I want to know the reason why, okay? I want to understand why. So to me, that's the first and only question we ask, is to say in our letter, we don't understand. Is your intention are you saying there can't be a case review committee? And why would you say that if we're independent from you? I want to understand that. That's the corpus of the question, right there. And so before what I see in here are things, we could do this, we could do that, we could do the other thing. I don't want to propose solutions. I want to define the problem. And that's what my letter would be if I was writing it. Why is it not the same as it was before? Why does it need to change? And maybe they have a great reason, and I just don't know what it is.
One of the things that Ms. Gooch has kind of reiterated in my conversations with her about this, just to kind of maybe clear up the terminology that we're using, is not so much that the case review committee itself cannot exist in some form. It's that the review of cases within the case review committee may need to be altered to
Fine,
fit the
clarify
ordinance.
what the problem is.
So
That's
there's
it.
that. I would be very comfortable having a conversation with council staff, who I think is the appropriate party, to kind of get an idea of what.
Why don't we just write a letter like she said and ask for the clarification in writing?
I mean, we can do that. I don't care how that happens, if you want to revise that, but do we need to meet to, approve your letter, or is that something
No.
that I can do as the chair, or how do you want to work that, Tina?
Chair Galloway, you can take a vote on behalf of the board to give the chair discretion to finalize that letter based on the discussion that the board's having tonight, so that the chair can make sure the parameters of the discussion are encapsulated in that final letter, whether it be questions or other information that the board wants to know. If that is something that the board would like to do, you could take a vote that says, this is the idea of what we are looking for, and we are granting discretion to our chair to finalize that letter for providing to the folks that need to get it.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I move that we delegate authority to the chair, to myself, to approve a final revised letter from Ms. Gooch.
And the mission is to find out what the problem, what precipitated the change. What's the reason that needs to change from what it was before?
Or does it? Okay, so that's the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, so we're going to do that. As far as just kind of circling back to your question, about these cases doubling up, generally speaking, these things are all handled in a very quick, 20-second, I move to approve the administratively closed cases and whatever. So I don't expect it to be a big problem, but if we need to, we could also always have a special meeting to do the case review.
Well, you remember, Leonard, when we did so many of them, there were times when we did have special meetings, but
Right.
we got through them.
So, there are solutions to that problem, but I don't anticipate this being like a month-long thing. I think this is going to correct itself at our next full board meeting.
And I think that, to answer your question, Chelsea, I don't think that the case review committee needs to meet until this is resolved. So I think we can just not do it and not be in violation of anything. Okay?
Yeah,
That makes
yeah, no,
sense?
I was just trying to have the more general discussion of how we manage the whole problem and why I was worried about just continuing without.
Yeah, but what I heard in that was, we can't have the case review committee meet. I agree with you. Until we solve this problem, we can't have it meet.
Okay, I understand, and I didn't know that this was happening, but I understand that there is dinner back there. So I would like to move to reorder our agenda and handle agenda item number 13, which is our closed session discussions, now, and take that break now.
That's a good idea.
Okay, so
I second your motion and would move us into closed session.
So-
Roll call.
So number 10 is, we're not going to discuss that at all.
We're going
We're
to come
not.
back. When we
we're,
gonna come back.
no,
take
but
it
we're
down.
not going to discuss it.
No, number 10, we're not going to
Right.
do it. We've tabled
But
it.
we'll come back to
We've
9
tabled
because
it
we
till
have to
next
get back to the item B.
Yes, we'll come back to 9, but, so Member Van Deventer has motioned that we move into closed session?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
We gotta do, aye.
Okay.
Okay. We are in closed session.